Hello children, welcome back to the class. I asked you two questions. Why fishes die when they come out of water and also cockroaches when they die when it is turned upside down. Did you guess the answer? And what is the process behind? Let us see in today's class how respiratory organs plays an important role in different living forms. So first we'll start with fish. What do they breathe in? Like plants inhale oxygen and they leave out carbon dioxide. Even human inhale oxygen and we leave out carbon dioxide. What about fishes, children? They breathe in oxygen. So they breathe in oxygen, but where do they get that oxygen? Very good. So fishes they live in water. Water carries oxygen. So what does they form here? What oxygen is found in dissolved form. So the water is inhaled. So oxygen in dissolved form will be utilized by the respiratory organ called gills. So which acts as a respiratory organ in fishes? Gills. So the oxygen will enter the gills and this gills will have connectivity with the blood vessel. So the oxygen will directly move into the blood vessel for the supply. So do you think how the movement takes place in the fish? How the dissolved form of oxygen enters the gills. So what is the process behind? Very good. The process through diffusion. I already told you diffusion is the movement of molecule from higher to lower concentration. So from a higher to the lower concentration, movement of oxygen molecule takes place. And which is the respiratory organ for fish? Gills. Coming to the next, cockroach. So can you see the dotted structures here? I think you could have seen these dotted structures in cockroach. These structures are called spiracles. These are called spiracles. So the respiratory organ of cockroach is spiracles. These are tiny holes that are present on the thorax region. And the oxygen, the air is inhaled by these spiracles. So when the spiracles are turned upside down, the insect will find it difficult to breathe and they die. So this is the reason why cockroaches die when they are turned upside down. So because the spiracles are responsible for the exchange of gases. And the third is earthworm. Tell me what is the respiratory organ of earthworm? The respiratory organ of earthworm is moist and delicate skin. Moist skin. You could have seen earthworms with a very moist and watery skin. So they breathe through their moist skin via the process of diffusion again. Then comes the frog. Frog is an amphibian. What do you mean by amphibian? It can live on both land as well as in water. So when they are found in water, they breathe through their moist skin. So when they are found in water, it breathes through skin, moist skin. And when they are found on land, it breathes through lungs. So this is when they are found in land. So amphibian, it can live on both land as well as in water. Okay. And the next is plant. Plant, I already told you in photosynthesis that plants can also breathe through their roots, through their stem as well as leaves. So when they breathe through roots, with the help of, it can breathe through with the help of root hairs. These are tiny hairs, tiny holes that are present on the surface of root. And when you take wood, it has tiny pores present on the bark or wood. You call that as lenticels. And through leaf, the structure called stomata. So you have the guard cells inside which acts as a gate for the exchange of gases. So every living forms will have a different respiratory organ and the mechanism varies based on their requirement. And one more thing you need to know, the diffusion process is mainly, it mainly depends on the requirement as well as the environmental factor. So let us see how it works. And what is the respiratory organ of human? Lungs. So now we'll get into the structure of lungs. So now let us get into the structure of the human respiratory organ, lungs. So we have a pair of lungs which is located in the chest cavity or the thoracic region. So the lung starts with the external nostril. So we have two holes here. So we call that as the external nostrils. So external nostrils will have tiny hairs as well as mucus. These two acts as a physical barrier which doesn't allow any dust or dirt to enter. So that is why we are advisable to breathe only through our nose and not through our mouth. Okay. And sometimes when the dust enters deeper, we either sneeze or cough immediately, which is a reflex action of our body. So now, our respiratory organ starts with the external nostrils. So it starts with the nostrils. The next is the nasal passage. The next is the nasal passage. So we have the nasal passage. Now, the air then enters to a structure called larynx. So we have a structure called larynx. So this larynx will not allow the food to enter. So we already saw there is a flap-like structure in the digestive system called the epiglottis, which will allow only food to enter and it separates the air. So the air passes inside into the larynx. Then we have a tube-like structure called the trachea. This tube-like structure will have certain rings called the rings of cartilage. So it has certain ring-like structure called the rings of cartilage. The function of this cartilage is it allows only trace or the exact amount of air to pass through. So it prevents the lung from air collapse. And then the lung branches into the right bronchi and the left bronchi. So then the lung branches into bronchi. Now again the bronchi divides into fine tube-like structures called the bronchioles. The bronchioles carry balloon or sac-like structure called the alveoli. So alveoli is the cell of lung. So multicellular organisms will have different organs and organ system. Each organ will have different cells to do its specific function. So cell of lung is called the alveoli where complete respiration takes place. And the lung is covered by a double wall layer called the pleural membrane. So we call this as the pleural membrane. And in between the pleural membrane, we have certain fluids called the pleural fluid. So this pleural fluid will prevent the lung from external damage. And the base of the lung is called the diaphragm. The base of the lung is called the diaphragm. I told you in the beginning that the respiration and breathing involves three important parts. One is the diaphragm, the other two are ribs and costal muscles. So you can find the ribs, and in between the ribs we have a type of muscle called the costal muscles. So these costal muscles along with ribs helps in the process of breathing. I will tell you how this breathing takes place. So what will happen? The diaphragm, which is like a sheet, so diaphragm will pull the lung down along with the ribs and the costal muscle. So what will happen when something is pulled down? When something is pulled down, you can find the lung expanding. So air from the external environment will move inside the lung. And the diaphragm is immediately released back. So what will happen? Air inside the lung is expelled out. So this is how exchange of gases takes place. The initial breathing takes place with the help of diaphragm, coastal muscles as well as ribs. So now we'll get into the process of a respiratory organ, lungs. So now we'll get into the process of respiration. So before respiration, what is the exchange of gases? How do they take place? Breathing. So I told you breathing takes place with the help of ribs, coastal muscles and diaphragm. So just imagine this is our diaphragm. When the diaphragm is pulled down, so what will happen when the diaphragm is pulled down? You can find enough space so air from the external environment will enter the lung. So when the diaphragm is pulled down, the air is filled and the lung expands. Just imagine the diaphragm is released. What will happen? The air inside the lung expels out. So this is the process of breathing in and breathing out. Okay? So breathing in, you call it as inhalation, and breathing out, you call it as exhalation. So these process takes place with the help of diaphragm, ribs and coastal muscles. So the air enters via the nostril, then gets into the nasal passage, then enters the larynx, then enters the trachea. The trachea will have cartilages. Cartilage are soft, flexible bone which will not allow excess amount of air to pass through, and it prevents from air collapse. Then the air enters the bronchi, and the bronchi divides into bronchiole, and the air enters the alveoli. So I told you alveoli is the cell of lungs. So what will happen? The air that we breathe in. What is the air that we breathe in? Oxygen. So the air that we breathe in will enter the alveoli via, what is the process involved here? By the process of diffusion. So the molecule, the movement of molecule from higher to lower concentration is diffusion, and through a membrane, okay, through the lung membrane. So what will happen? The alveoli is connected to blood vessels. So alveoli is connected to blood vessels. So oxygen from here will move via diffusion and they enter into the circulation. So since I told you that diffusion depends on the requirement and the environmental factor. Since fishes are too small, since their body arrangement is very small, the oxygen intake will be very less and the diffusion rate will also be less. Though the amount of oxygen is very less in water, the requirement is also less. But fishes breathe fast, but the diffusion rate will be slow. Whereas in human, we are multicellular, so we require a huge amount of oxygen intake to perform different functions. So diffusion alone is not possible to intake air. We also require some other process, some other external component to perform respiration. That external component is respiratory pigment. So we have a respiratory pigment called hemoglobin. So this will study in circulation. Hemoglobin. Hem meaning iron and globin meaning protein. So it is an iron protein which is present in the RBC. So where you find this hemoglobin? Which is present in the RBC. RBC stands for red blood cells. Okay. So that is responsible for our red color. So what happens? The oxygen from the alveoli will be diffused into the blood circulation and reaches the RBC. Now, this RBC carrying hemoglobin, the hemoglobin will bind or takes up the oxygen and forms a compound called oxyhemoglobin. So this oxyhemoglobin is transported to all the parts of the body. So this is how inhalation takes place. So when the diaphragm is pulled down, the air is filled inside the alveoli, and from alveoli via diffusion it reaches the circulation. So which helps as a respiratory pigment to carry oxygen? hemoglobin. So it forms a compound called oxyhemoglobin, which is transported to all the parts. And on the other way, we have another blood vessel which will carry carbon dioxide from all the other parts of the body, and via the same diffusion, what will happen? The carbon dioxide is expelled out. So the diaphragm will be released or relaxed. So the carbon dioxide that are present here will be expelled out. That is why we leave out carbon dioxide. Just imagine how spontaneity, oxygen and the carbon dioxide gases, exchange of gases takes place in the lung. So this is all through the process of diffusion. And one more thing, carbon dioxide is highly soluble in water. So they easily mix with water or the blood and they move out from the lung. So this is how process takes place in our lung. Since it takes place inside the cell, you call this type as cellular respiration or internal respiration. So you call this as cellular respiration or internal respiration. And one more thing, if the diaphragm is relaxed, we know that the carbon dioxide is expelled out, and the same way, and it is not that lung will be devoid of gases. So lung will have certain amount of oxygen all the time in order to maintain, in order to continue the function. That presence of oxygen in the lung for all the time, you call that as residual volume. So residual volume meaning the lung will have certain amount of air to maintain the process. Though breathing is continuous, the lung will also have certain amount of air within all the time in order to maintain the process. You call that volume as the residual volume. Any doubts, children?